Hi, dear Circolo Bateson and company. It's me, Nora, and I so wish I could be with you all today, but I'm taking care of my mother and trying not to do some traveling right now. So I hope that Italy, being a country that understands and respects family, that's okay with you. And in that same spirit, we are here to talk about my father and the ways in which his ideas are becoming more and more not only relevant but holdable, touchable, sensible in this question of how do you make change. And I've been for so many years, as have all of you, around many dear colleagues who have been trying so earnestly and heartfully to make changes, to change the education system, or to change the political system, or to make new policy, to address poverty, to even to do things as specific as do regenerative soil work. And yet, one of the things that keeps being so increasingly revealed is that the thinking that goes into the types of change that are trying to be made is still holding those patterns that perpetuate the problems. And I'm guessing that is kind of where you were hoping I would go with this, and how that is tying even into the work that I've been doing with warm data and what has been discovered through that. In over 10 years, it's been 10 years now since warm data began, I have witnessed a different kind of change taking place. And for so many years, I couldn't articulate it because it's actually beyond language. The place where I'm seeing change happen through the warm data processes. There are two processes. One is the warm data lab, which is an in-person session of a couple of hours where we address a question that is at a particular kind of logical type relationship with a number of transcontextual sort of stations to walk between and have conversations between. And there's an online version called People Need People, and People Need People again has a kind of a question that's in a particular relationship with the levels of abstraction with the contexts. And people get moved from breakout room to breakout room, addressing the same question through multiple contexts. You might have the question in a People Need People session of what is continuing, or what's being remembered, or what's being revealed, or what is essential. Whereas in a warm data lab, it might be what is home in a changing world, or what is risk in a changing world, what is learning in a changing world. These processes are so frustrating to most people who are looking for a particular takeaway. They want to have a flip chart full of insights that they can then make committees that they can see through. I'm throwing sticks to my dog because this is an interspecies discussion. And it's not there. It's not there to be found. You can't find the insights, and a lot of times you can't find the insights because they don't come up in that relationship. They come up later. A person might attend a warm data lab, and then they're having a conversation with their family at dinner, and then the way that they're in conversation at dinner is somehow different. And then their kids might go to school the next day and be in conversation with other children, and the way that they're in conversation with other children is changed by the way they were in conversation with their parents the night before. And then there's a different relationship then that starts to take place on the playground or with those kids and their parents. And my point is this, is that when real systemic shift is happening, you cannot trace it back. You can't point back and say, this is where it came from. All right, it's that difference between having change that takes place in the first order, where you would say, we need to address poverty by putting money here. Or change that takes place in nth order, which is something like living in a world in which it is perfectly obvious in the premises of being that everyone's well-being is contingent upon everyone's well-being. That includes the other species. So I was at a loss for what to call this, how to talk about this, what was actually happening, because my sense was that what was changing was nothing because it was everything. I couldn't point to a particular idea that had shifted. I wasn't changing people's mindset or raising their consciousness. Something else was happening. It was as though they were part of a new kind of music in which the chords and the notes and the lyrics and the sentiments were coalescing to form completely new experiences of life. That's a metaphor, but I hope you get where I'm coming from. I realized, and this largely started, speaking generationally, in a conversation with my daughter, Sarah, who some of you have met. And Sarah, in her frustration, said about all the crises in the world, "Mom, they're all so insidious. It's just insidious." And she was talking about racism. She was talking about the violence toward other cultures. She was talking about the greed and the consumerism. She was talking about addiction. She was talking about the reductionism in the media and political discourse that pitted people against each other. She was talking about technology. It's all insidious. Now, I don't know what the Italian translation is of insidious. But in English, insidious means something like this gradual accumulation that is unseen over time that brings something harmful about. So cancer is an example of something insidious. And or addiction or corruption is insidious. It's something that is collecting and aggregating. It's coalescing in unseen ways that produce something harmful. But what we tend to see is the harmful thing. And then we want to solve the problem of this harmful thing, corruption, addiction, cancer, what have you. But what we're not paying attention to is all the unseen coalescences that have taken place. And so I started to ask the question, like, really, what is the opposite of insidious? Is it possible that there is an unseen coalescing going on that actually produces vitality? That in a meadow, all of the organisms are actually, through abductive process, coming together in ways that are shaping each other? Is it possible that actually evolution requires this kind of unseen coalescing? That in order to get out of the trap of repeating the familiar, okay, if an organism does what it does because it does what it does, an earthworm earthworms, and my dog Blake is being my dog Blake, and all the organisms in this forest are doing what they do, and they're the millions of interrelational processes that we see here are in this kind of ongoing symphony. Now, the thing about a symphony is it's not as responsive as something like an improvisation. So it's a tricky sort of relationship between the way in which things stay the same and the way in which they change. And if they don't change, they can't stay the same. But if they stay the same, Without change, they die. In other words, they can't stay the same. So evolution requires some kind of ability that an organism might have that would allow it to know how to evolve. Now, this is a question that Gregory asked that is so profound. How does an organism know how to evolve? Right, guys? How does an organism know how to evolve? Because that would mean that the organism knows how to do something it's never done before. And in order for that to be so, it's got to be outside of its familiar Umwelt, outside of its familiar epistemology, perception, habituation, etc. That new limb that something grows, a new thought, a new language, right? So aphanipoiesis is a word that is based on two Greek pieces. Aphani means unseen. And it means unseen in a couple of different sort of ways. In English, we have the word diaphanous, or phantom, or fantasy. And aphani is the root of those words. And aphani is like a humble or shy unseen. It's not hidden. It's not invisible. It's just unseen. In this forest that I'm in right now, there are millions of unseen organisms. They're not hiding from you. They're just unseen. There's all sorts of processes taking place that you are not perceiving. Not because you can't, and not because they're not possible to perceive, but because you're not perceiving them. They're not in your habit to perceive. We don't have language. We don't have day-to-day capacity for that. So aphani is unseen. Poiesis, as you know, means becoming. So this word aphanipoiesis is referring to, I think very excitingly, okay, I cannot tell you how excited I am about this. It's changed my world. This way in which there is this unseen realm of things that are coalescing, that are actually producing the premises into which various responses to our world take place. Okay, so you know, it's easy to point to ways in which we have been habituated into thinking, I don't know, money is real, or that education systems are necessary parts of society. I mean, you know, really, if you talk to a deer or an earthworm, these are completely abstract ideas. So in terms of life itself, those concepts are not viable. But we've been habituated into them. We don't question them. They are there for us now. They are in the premises. And your question was about how are Bateson's ideas necessary to think about change now. And this is my whole world, is this question of how do we actually nourish and nurture the premises so that new connective processes can take place. So that there's a kind of flexibility that is actually still unseen and unknown and unspent and maybe even unrecognizable. Right? This is kind of radical. The change that we actually need to make is unrecognizable. Because if we recognize it, we name it, we shape it, we reconfigure it into that which we already know, which pulls it right back in to all those systems that are perpetuating themselves. Now, this is a tall order to somehow make a space for new kinds of connective tissue between ideas and experiences, memories, sensations. How do we begin to explore new possibilities even of how we smell, hear, touch, taste? How do we as organisms learn to make sense of our world in ways that are so new that we might not even have words for them? No subtitles, no translations. So I feel very strongly that this is the place to work. And in my conviction of this, attention to the euphony-poetic realm, if you will, is also a very strong sense that I think my father would have also held, of extreme caution. Because messing around with this territory can be manipulative. It could be propaganda. This is the way in which other people manipulate the deep stories that have created, horrible things in our world. So messing around with this territory is no joke. And so for me, this work must be held with a very keen attention to what my father called conscious purpose. That when we have a predetermined agenda of what we think the better way of thinking would be, we're already in trouble. That what we are doing, if we're doing it, I think, with higher integrity, is making a space for there to be a kind of wilderness of transcontextual connective process. That you don't get to say what the outcome will be. You don't even get to predict or to in any way have an agenda for. And that's very difficult. And I hope that we might be able to work on some of this together. Of course, some of the ways in which that can be done most delightfully is with art, with poetry, with humor, with music, with those things that reach beyond our verbal connective experience. And also interaction with other species, which is why I'm here throwing sticks to my dog in the forest. That when I am in relationship with Blake, we have a whole different kind of communication. And I think anybody who has pets or interacts with even their plants has experienced that. There's something important there. Something unseeable, unnameable, unclaimable, unmanipulatable. Something wild, but something that is in communion. Okay, not communication, but communion with life. I miss you guys. Thank you.